All right, folks, welcome. I have a great guest. You guys don't know this guy, I don't think. Some of you do, because if you're a comic booker like me, you have to do cleaning and pressing. This is Lenny from Spineworks. He has done some work for me in the past. He is kind of down that rabbit hole of what condition is and how to clean up mistakes. And he's dealt with all kinds of things. Brother, thank you so much for fitting this in, man. It's cool to have you on.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I tell you, I love being on these shows, and being invited is a big thing for me because since I don't have my own and I don't have time, because I know you guys put a lot of work into making your studio and the backgrounds and everything, and then I hear the editing part is the part that takes the longest. So I have to give it to you guys who do this type of stuff. This is awesome. Appreciate it, and I appreciate you
Well, we
inviting me.
wouldn't have it if it wasn't for folks like you and folks out there watching. It's just such a treat to be able to do this. And I really want to just kind of get into a brief sort of like elevator pitch of what you do. So give everybody like a synopsis for like the normie out there. Like, what is it that cleaning and pressing and comic books, and what does spine work actually do?
Okay. Well, first off, to the people who are brand new to this type of service, because it is a service, I would say maybe 30 years ago, cleaning and pressing was like a no-no. It was like a taboo, and people felt like it was like cheating in some sorts. You take a book that was bent out of shape or dirty, you cleaned it, you pressed it in whichever manner you did back then, and then try to resell it before CGC started back in 2000. So of course, when CGC kicked in, uh, somehow, some way, CCS was purchased. Once that happened, that kind of changed everything in this business. It was allowed, it was acceptable because CGC was doing it. Now it's no longer a hidden service, and that's what we came in during COVID. We both lost our jobs, and we were like, well, got to do something. And I've been already cleaning and pressing for 5 years. So I was like, well, let's try to do this on a more professional level and provide this service for everybody who would want it. But again, you have to pitch it, because some people are like, well, what do you mean? That sounds like restoration. No, it's not restoring because I'm not adding anything to the book, and I am not trying to um, put tape or glue or color touching. It's just revitalizing the book, conserving what the book already is, and just making it look presentable. And that helps with the grade points because, as you know, if you read your grades, if they put the grades on there, they don't do it all the time, but you read your grades and they're like crease on cover, finger bend on cover, soiling on cover. All of those things, a majority of it can come off, make the book look better, try to get the highest grade possible. And I will put this out there, and I'll be the first to admit it. Cleaning and pressing will not guarantee you a 9.8. In the end, it's up to the graders. There are defects the books have, and that's one thing we provide. We do provide a consulting service like a pre-screen. And if you're not sure yourself, you can send the books to us and we'll say, what is your goal? And you tell me, well, that batch of books, I'm looking to get 9.6 or better. And then we can go through them and say, yeah, this half maybe, this other half no. And then there's ones that it's like a of the dice. And that's what we tell people. If you really got to get that 9.6, then you should do a pre-screen with CGC. Saves you a ton of money. And then at least you know you tried and didn't get it, but at least you didn't have to pay the full price. And again, we also provide, now that we've been growing, we are a certified CGC blue label dealer and now also facilitation. For those who don't know what facilitation means, it's the signature series, the yellow label, for when we go to cons and we witness. Like this weekend we were at Heroes Con. I had my witnesses running around like a chicken without a head in 3 days to get at least we had a total of 180 books to get signatures, like from um, Adam Kubert. We had to get signatures from Roy Thomas, Jim Storanko, Junior, so forth, so forth. I mean, there was so many artists at that show, and we had to get it all done in 3 days. So now we're doing the sorting books that customers now want cleaned and pressed, and now we'll submit them on their behalf to CGC. So that's basically it in a nutshell.
Let's break some of that down. You use a lot of terminology that some folks may not totally understand. I want to kind of
Okay.
get into a couple of those things that will parse out, I think, of what you said, because you started out with something that I think is very important for people to understand is the concepts of 9.8 and greater, because there are 9.9s, or at least a little bit more common than they were even a
Right.
couple years ago. But that difference between 6 and 8, and really definitely 9.4 and above, is when something on the cover, and I use this term, color break, right? So the
Hmm.
white shows through. So people are, you're taking your book and, they're opening it up, they're doing this with it. These crease lines get in there and you'll see these little white lines. There's nothing
Right.
that you can do to undo those white lines. Once they're done, they're
No.
done. Okay.
They're that's wear and tear,
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
and that happens from. I mean, I know I was a kid once, and I used to roll them up, put them in my back pocket, and
Yeah.
even if I shoved it in my book bag the wrong way, it got bent, and that
Yep.
just destroyed the spine. And
And
unfortunately, we cannot put that color back in. And if someone says, "Well, maybe you can," now that's called restoration. Then.
yeah, yeah. So that's one of the things when he's talking about restoration. He was talking about some of that kind of stuff. That's one of the things that's very important to understand is that some of these things are defects or wear and
Hmm.
tear that you can't undo. I had a beautiful copy I had bought from Urban Legends over in Brandon, Florida. It's a
Oh
Wolverine
yeah.
cover, and he was very clear. It's a perfect book except for, and he showed me those 3 lines. And when we sent them in, I think you did the cleaning grading on it, cleaning and pressing on it. We sent him, we got a 9.4, which is exactly what we expected to get. So like you kind of can visualize where
Hmm.
that kind of lies. The other thing I
Right.
think is important for people to understand too, Lenny, with that is most of the time, if books are out open, they're not bagged and boarded in stores, or if they're like a newsstand type era type things, they're getting wear and tear just by physically being handled all the time, right?
Right, right, and that's the other thing where people always ask me, "Well, what's the difference between a newsstand and a direct?" All comic books before I want to say 1978 were all newsstands. That's and the concept of a newsstand is an actual what the word states. It is. I'm from New York, so of course, being born and raised there, back in the day, you would just go anywhere, and every other corner there was a physical little structure made out of wood or metal, depending how much they can afford. And they were newsstands. They were selling newspapers. That was their primary product to sell. And then came magazines and comic books. And of course, comic books, in those days, people just glance, looked at it, and it's like, oh, that's a great cover, and they'll flip through pages and put it right back in, and that's why they got so abused.
Mhm.
And then, and I don't know if you know this, where the craziness between the newsstand and direct really blew up, and that was due to the guy that owns that comic book shop in Denver,
Yep. Mile High
um,
Comics.
Mile High
Yep.
Comics.
Yep. Chuck.
Um,
Hmm.
Chuck.
Hmm.
He was interviewed one day, and I mean, Chuck has been in the business a long time. I respect the
Hmm.
guy. He knows the business, and he explained. He goes, "You think about it." He said, "The newsstand is considered like a variant these days because they were abused, they were manhandled, and they are printed in a smaller number than what they are today. Direct copies are sometimes printed in the millions, right? But the newsstands were printed in a lesser format for its time. So of course, if you compare let's say a book, Star Wars #1, perfect example, right? Um, if the Star Wars one came out just a year later, you would have direct copies, right? Of course, the news stand version would be abused all the time, and then the direct ones were really nice because they were sold in
Hmm.
stores, your local pharmacy in those days, five and dimes for those who don't know, Woolworth, you know, and so forth. And those were better condition books versus the newsstand. And Chuck made a big deal out of it. And because of that, that's where the market started seeing that variation difference in price, saying, well, yeah, it makes sense. They were abused, manhandled. How many of those are really in 9.8s in today's standards? Not many.
Right. Not many at
Because,
all. It's funny you bring that up too, because I remember reaching out to Chuck. I literally had this run in with Chuck in kind of the mid 2000s in through like 2010, trying to run my Batman run, right? My massive Batman run that I had. And I would go to his site and I'd find these different prices, and they'd be like newsstand versions. It would be like exponentially more expensive for this newsstand
Mhm.
version. And I
Yeah.
ultimately just reached out. I'm like, okay, I don't get. And so where I also learned about like the DC Universe variants as well, right? Because during the
Right.
'90s there were these other variants with these different things. And I've done a video on that, folks. I'll try to remember to put the link in the description for that video. But he was one of these guys who was just kind of an observer of the market. He understood, and
Hmm.
because of the volume that he had dealt with, he had seen how rare those things are. And I think now when we look at grading as being kind of an integral part of the business, it's different now. I mean, I think there was always people who was like for me, I had a foot in every England ring. You and I talked about this at one point where it's like I was a reader and I was a collector, and then I was also a bit of an investor and a flipper. Like I did a little bit
Right.
of everything. Like I did a little bit, and the investing flipping part now has like two layers: the ungraded versus and the not and the graded. So there's a couple different layers with that.
Right.
They're always like the wall books people. Like
Hmm.
they were never going to open them, right? They bought Crow number one on the wall and it just stayed in the bag, and the boy would get changed out, but it was never going to get like manhandled. So
Right.
uh, when you were talking with customers and things like that, do most people just come to you with a list or a set of books that they kind of want graded, or do they kind of ask you for some advice to determine if it even is worth the time and the money to get graded?
Well, lately I guess again, since we've been, again, I'm no celebrity. I'm nobody famous, but like I explained to you earlier, I've gone to so many shows, and Spineworks has become a brand, you know. And people see our videos, people seen our pictures, they go to our Facebook and Instagram, and now people will call me and say, "Hey, I got a small collection, 10,000 books." For some people, that's a lot, and for others, that's little. But this gentleman called me from Southwest Florida, and he was like, "Hey, I got a small collection of 10,000 books. I know that a lot of it could be fillers, but I have picked out the higher, more value books. I would like to sit down with you, pay for your time, and see if it's really worth grading these books, because I am not a grader. I bought these years ago. I don't even know if the books are complete, and I would have to sit down and help them pick out the books, the keys, because that's the ultimate goal, is pick out the keys, and then go through them one by one and say, okay, let's see the conditions of the books, because of course, certain books, they got to be a minimum, and we're talking Silver Age, a minimum of 6.0 to be at a good price value, right? Six
Hmm.
to me, it's like midpoint. Some books, if they're super rare, even a five could be very expensive. But for me in silver, I'm not a 9.0 guy for silver. They get very expensive. So for me, six is a very presentable book. It has value. You can put it on your wall and still look beautiful. And still, you could say one day I can, if I have to sell it, so be it. And customers will be like, "Oh, okay, great." And they're like, "Oh, how do you know how many pages a book is supposed to have after so many years?" I mean, I've been in comic books 42 years. And that's a mighty long time. But somebody said you have a lot of useless knowledge, and I said to them, "Well, you might see it that way."
That's what my wife said to me one time. She called me the master of useless information. What is with this stigma that us nerds are getting with useless information? It's not useless at all. We're putting it to
It,
good work, Lenny.
I guess because they see it as, oh, that's just paper, that's pulp, and maybe if I was a surgeon or something, it'd be useful information, right? But for me in this business now, every little thing I've learned in the last 42 years, and every book we've handled, I've already got almost memorized how many pages a certain book has, who wrote it, who's the artist, looking at also restoration, because we can do consulting service on a book if it has resto or not. And again, not everybody knows, so they've called us and say, "Hey, how about if I come to you and I've got certain books?" I mean, I had a gentleman who came to me not long ago with a Batman number 6.
Wow, that's a nice
Imagine.
book. Yeah.
And it's a great book. And he goes, "I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know if this is real or not." I
Mm,
said, "Not a problem. I will meet you," and blah, 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 to make him feel comfortable. He was an older gentleman. And the craziest part is he said he found it in his mother's house, who passed
mm,
away. He inherited the house after all the legalities and everything. And now the house is legally in his name and all. And he had to clean it out because he actually found someone to buy it right away. So while he's throwing stuff out and keeping certain memoirs of his mother and everything. He finds a Batman #6, and he's like, I don't know, is this real or not? Because someone told me if it is, it's very expensive. And sure enough, after I looked it over, I go, yeah, this is 100% a real Batman #6. It's a little bent out of shape. It needed some cleaning and pressing. But I told him when it's said and done, this book could probably be a 4.5 or better. And if it is, it's a few $1,000s in your pocket if you
Yeah.
decide to sell it. If not, you can hold on to it. But it wouldn't be hard to sell. It's a Batman
No.
#6.
Yeah, that
So
would be a lot of upside on that book for sure. That's for sure.
right. And in the end, the book actually, if I'm correct, memory serves me right, it came back a 5.0. The
Mm.
gentleman was like, wow, is that really good? I'm like, that's awesome. Got to think about it. This book came out in 19, what, 40, 47, 48 ish. I mean,
It's yeah, it's been a long that book is set, yeah. I mean, I met you the same way. I just kind of like brought over like a I think my wife and I each carried a box and you just kind of went through the box with us, gave us some advice.
yeah.
We made a stack and just sent on its way. We went back and forth a few times and it was a great learning experience for me, Lenny, because up until that point I went to 4 local shops and no one could help me. No one could move from like the general conditioning and pricing of a book in a store to what
Mhm.
grading and submission is. Now, I think that has changed. Do you think that's changed a lot over the last couple of years where stores are sending stuff in more regularly?
Um, okay, so the reality right now, the market is still a little soft.
The market's
Um,
really soft, folks. I'm sorry.
eh,
Lenny, I think the market is really soft. I'm really taking, I got a whole shelf of books over here that are still graded, plus what's on the wall. And it's like, just can't let it go for these kind of prices. Like some things are just rough right now. So, okay. So the market's
well,
soft. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
okay, like I said, the market is soft, but there are some books that kind of fall out of that league.
Hmm.
Let's just say that are still retaining pricing. They're people are wondering why is this book so expensive. Some of these EC horror books have gone crazy.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay, this is the realm where it's not superheroes. It is before superheroes and EC horror books. The rarity of some of these books, especially in high grade, it's outlandish. I've actually physically gone to Heritage Auction for the what they call the collector summit.
Yeah,
It
I've
was
covered that a couple times.
a 2-day event on a weekend. They give you the tour of the facility and they were showing you everything that was up for auction or what was going on auction that weekend. And it was an amazing experience. And let me tell you, some of the pricing on some of these books, you're like, oh, well, the market's doing great, but only for specific books.
Yeah.
Some of the other stuff I've dipped down, even Amazing Fantasy 15s, which was the king in the last 4 years, has dipped down. But it's starting to creep up a little bit more, just a tad. But these EC horror books, for example, the prices are almost whatever they can ask for, and especially if they're a 6.0 or above
I was gonna say
for a book
if
from
it's like you said, if it was a 6, they just don't exist. Like I missed out on an auction on one and it was ungraded, but I could tell by the photos. I was like, okay, this is looking at possibly a 7. Like it was at that point where it could be a 7. It could really get, and it just kept the price just kept going and going. And it was like it
uh-huh,
literally sold for I think double what I
yeah,
was bidding, like where I was at. Like it in that last little bit, the run up went crazy, and it went to like double to where because I had the price like here and it was like it ran over me and then at the last minute or a few just shot. I'm like, wow, it sold for double ungraded. Now still has to go through the
yeah,
grading process. There could still be a flaw in this book that is in there. I don't know. I didn't physically
right,
touch it. um but I think that's the way this hobby has always been. There's been like these moves forward, pullbacks, move forward, pullback. You mentioned Amazing
mhm,
Fantasy. I think that it may probably just move the baseline for Amazing Fantasy, just move the new floor on Amazing
right,
Fantasy. Um, because I think that the fads are what drives a lot because the Marvel fad is kind of driven away right now. So we're in the middle of the Deadpool Wolverine movie. We'll see how that plays
right.
out. And then there's been a little bit of an X-Men thing because of the TV show, and I think some interest in X-Men, but not
Oh, yeah,
on real expensive books other than like first appearance of Magneto or something, which people are already in or they're
right,
not. It's not really a massive flipping book. You're either in it or not, and you kind of know where the
right.
price is. When you
And
go,
it's
because
and it,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, sorry to interrupt you, and I wanted to bring this up because a lot of people, the newbies, let's call the newbies, right? People
Hmm.
from the last 25 years. What has bothered me the most in this market, and you will know, there was a time when you would buy a comic book, let's say 30 years ago, and if it was a high value book, it was because of rarity, a first appearance, or some sort of change in that character's life, where the value of the book would be up here. Now, today's standards, if a movie relating to that character is great, it's up here.
Hmm.
If the movie's a bomb, the character's down here.
Hmm.
And that just, I don't know, I don't agree with the market of the books being affiliated with the TV and movies.
Hmm.
And I think it's just bad business, but people are using that as their advantage to sell books because of a movie. Because you got to think about it. Fantastic Four has been around way before any of these movies and TV shows, and it's been one of the worst movie franchises ever made. I'm sorry to say, and I love a lot of Jack Kirby's work, but Fantastic Four, depending which books they are, they have some value, and then some others is just, you know. And again, the movies dictate, TV dictates, and I don't think it should be affiliated. It should still be, hey, it's a Fantastic Four number one. How many of those are still around and certain grades? And this is where the value is. And that's where Overstreet, to me, I still have a lot of respect for Robert Overstreet, who created the Overstreet, you know, showing the values of books, but it's not based on TV or movie. You know what I mean? I don't know what's your opinion on that.
I think that entertainment as a whole has always been very influential in driving attention and new customers. So, I'm a Batman '89 child where comic books was a thing when I was really young, but Batman '89 turned me into a reader, collector, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, Dark Knight Returns was perfectly timed year one, and then I always talk about the sweet spot of Batman for me was from issue 400 to 500 is my sweet spot. It's like this every
Yep.
single issue, every single week. It was the detective, it was Legends of the Dark Knight, whatever. So I'd be a hypocrite if I wasn't trying to give credit to the entertainment industry for getting me involved in whatever because I was that
Okay.
customer. So
Right.
I think the MCU did that in some ways. I think the problem is I felt like that in the last 5 years, right before the pandemic, especially, there was a divergence away from comic book focus and MCU focus, and
Right.
the comics are on the back burner, like the quality level, the top notch writers and creators in DC and Marvel. But um, I think that stores are the ones that are kind of trapped by this because they're trapped by literally the attention span and the fad of the moment. And I've complained a lot about this. I actually have them right here. I've been pricing them here all day on and off of sports cards because sports cards are like
Oh,
this
okay.
big fad thing, right? You can't
Hmm.
move a Hall of Fame quarterback like Elway or something like that for like just hundreds of cards, if not thousands, or just for pennies, like $5 and less, right? And
Right.
yet this rookie that may last for nothing is the
Right.
hot topic right now, and that's the thing. And I think comics are not significantly different. That it's a little bit different, but it's not significantly different. Like you said, we could take X-Men, like X-Men '97. I mentioned it briefly, so
Right.
they get a little bit of attention because these are characters that were talked about on the show or whatever. So the first
Right.
appearance of Bastion or Mister Sinister, and they kind of have
Hmm.
become the hot topic. But I don't think it grew a lot of fans for going out and buying Dark Phoenix. But that's probably the best comic book stories that would ever have been
Oh,
done, right? So
right.
it's one of those things where I think it has always been, but I think it's the fact that there's been so many movies and TV shows that have put spotlights on things, and it
Right.
creates chasers and speculators that make the market kind of inflated.
Right.
I don't know because I don't know what the legs will be 20 years from now because the volume of comics that are even being made is so much less than what you and I know. Like, I mean, literally, we're
Well,
making 10 to 40,000 comics compared to hundreds of thousands under Shooter.
right.
It's just a different world. So I don't know what that market looks like. And are there going to be new customers like my kids? You know what I mean? I don't
Well, right.
know. I don't know. Hmm.
And I believe, like, the okay. So, as a kid growing up, my dream to see the X-Men on the big screen
Hmm.
was like a wish come true when it
Hmm.
finally came to fruition and everything. And I said, wow, they finally did it. They put X-Men on the big screen, Um, but it was because I wanted to see a live action. You got the
Hmm.
cartoons,
Yeah.
forever. Um, you even had Amazing Spider-Man cartoons where the X-Men were like guest stars, you
Hmm.
know, and that was great too. But to see them in live action, you're like, wow, finally get to see it. Yeah, could it have been better? Yeah. Was the writing a little, but still, it was to see the X-Men on the big screen, which was a big thing. But now you have X-Men 97, and kids like my son, who's 31, who saw the original series, he's blown away and he loves it. And he got this passion to see them again now and continue from where it left off.
Hmm.
And he's like, Dad, it is so much better now. And I said to him,
Mm.
well, I never really saw some of the ones you did. So I had to go back, watch all that until now and say, okay, yeah, there's a huge difference. They put a lot more adult um, writing into it.
Mhm.
They've got some nitty gritty into it. There's grittiness into it more than it was before. Um, and they taken more of the actual content from the comic books, you know what I mean, instead of just creating a whole new story. And I have to say, X-Men 97 has, you know put a good happiness in my heart for X-Men again. I got to talk to Chris Claremont this weekend, and let me tell you, if anybody had a line, his line was 3 times bigger than anybody in the whole room. Everybody
Rightfully
wanted to talk
so.
to Chris
I
Claremont
would be there too
because
because I've never met Chris.
right,
Yeah.
and
So I,
and
I couldn't
Chris,
agree more. I just wanted to say with X-Men 97, I did a review on all of this. So I have to do one more video on the finale because it's 3 episodes long on the finale. But I did a rewatch of all the original, the first, big. There's a playlist, guys. You guys will see the playlist. Um, I will say I was torn. I wanted your thoughts. The reason I jumped in was I wanted to ask your thoughts though, because I think the difference with X-Men 92, which we grew up on.
right,
Well, we were both older, but was the
yeah,
big deal back in the day, right? Versus the new one is they got away from the kids, right? So this isn't about selling comics or toys or whatever.
right,
I'm like, well, what is the customer? So that was my big complaint. I don't necessarily dislike the new show. I think the new show did really well. I think the
hmm,
old show was about when they adapted Dark Phoenix was over like 5 or 6 episodes. It was this massive thing because they paid a lot of
right,
attention to it. So they did this great adaptation to sell comic books and sell toys. And
hmm.
the new show, I don't know, does that. So I wanted your thoughts on that. Do you think it? Where do they get new customer? I mean, your son's rejuvenated his interest, but I don't know at 30 that he's the target audience. But maybe that is the point. That's the new target audience. It's just the adults. But does that build
Well,
us 20 years? Yeah.
so let's say, for example, I've done some cons back to back, some big ones and some small ones, and every time I'm online, someone always brings up X-Men 97. It's
Mm,
like the best Marvel has put out in a long time
agreed.
for for being a cartoon, okay? Because
Hmm.
it's not live action. For being a cartoon, the animation, the graphics, and the storyline has just been spot on. And I'm very, very happy with the quality of what they've put into it, and the time, and taking content from the actual stories. And as you know, a majority of all those stories Chris Claremont wrote, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I tell you, without Chris Claremont, who did those books, I don't know where X-Men would be today. It probably would have been a canceled book
It was ready to
because
be canceled. They were because remember they were reprinting them, right? Because that was what that
exactly,
there's like 30 issues where there's no issues, but guys, it's just them reprinting the other version again before they
yeah.
gave. And we should
And they
probably thank
just gave it a
Len
different
Wein, right? Len
right,
Wein
and
kind of
then
just the
they
giant
just gave
size
it
X Men. It kind of saves things. So yeah, go ahead.
right, and the X-Men had those reprints that just slapped a different cover on it,
Mhm.
different
Yep.
artists, and then of course with them trying to give X-Men the opportunity with the giant size, because that and
Mhm.
and here's the funny part about that book, a lot of people don't understand. Back in the 80s, the book that was more expensive was X-Men 94, not Giant Size 1. It was the opposite.
Mhm.
And now it's the opposite. Giant Size 1 is the big book, 94 comes after, which cracks me up because back in those days, X-Men 94s were expensive as hell. And I
Yeah.
remember borrowing money from my mother to say, "Hey, I really want that comic book, but man, it's out of my price range." And she's like, "Okay, I'll lend you the credit card and we'll buy your book." And pay me back. You know what I mean? Where I
That's
bought
awesome.
X-Men 1 from a guy that in today's standards could have been a 9.8. He sold it to me for $100.
Wow.
You know,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
wish I
Yeah.
still had that book today, but
I
for a
know.
hundred
I
bucks.
we all
But
boy,
my
if we all if if we could all. So let's go back
right.
to um some of the biggest, like, I don't want to say disappointments that people have when they come to you. They come to you with a book and you look at it and
Mhm.
you're like, "Oh man, I got some bad news for you." What are some of the
Yep.
bad news alert things at home? People you're watching, you got some comics,
Yeah.
you don't know if it's even worth, I don't want to say grading, but like you want to kind of know what the condition is. Let's just say that. Let's forget about
Right.
submitting it to CGC. You just want to know, what are some of the big things for you that you see people go, "Oh, I didn't know that," and you're like, "Oh
Well,
yeah, just big
you know,
disqualifiers."
it's funny how you say that. Oh, I didn't know that. The first thing I ask the customer, newbie or not, because even some of the people of my age group, I ask them, "Did you even look at the back? Did you
Hmm.
take it out of the bag?"
Hmm.
And they're like, "No." I said, "So you never looked at the back?" He goes, "No, the front looked great." I said, "Yeah, but it's the comic book as a whole.
Yep.
So if it doesn't have a back cover, you're screwed, or
Yeah.
have a cover." And I've had come across that where we're sitting in a I mean, I went to a guy's house, 5,000 square foot mansion, and we're looking at a long box, and he's like, "Nope, never looked at the back of these. The front looked good to me, so I guess the back does too." And we pulled it out, and it's missing half of the back, or a few pages are
Wow.
gone. And you say, "Well, this would have been a $30,000 book, but not now."
It's funny
And
you say that too because you and I both missed this. I've told this story. I'm not getting it regraded. I live with it. So I had a Venom book, which was like there's like 1,200 or 1,500 of them. It's this beautiful cover, and send it in. It came back as a 9. I'm like, what the heck? So I look at the notes. We both missed on the back of this book. It looks like someone's fingertip, and there's like it's just a little tiny blemish on the back where someone's touched it. You know what I mean? Like someone's rubbed some of the ink or something like the fingertip. And
right,
you had cleaned and pressed it, and we sent it in, and neither one of us caught the fact that on the back, you have to know it was there to kind of like scour the whole thing because it didn't like stand out at you, obviously, and it's on the back. So it's like how much attention
right,
do you pay to the back? But it's so important. Obviously, when you're right to make sure there is a back, depending on the age of the
right,
book, but also just to look for a discoloration. In my case, I have a couple that came back that I didn't get graded. I didn't get cleaned and pressed. It's like a fold on the back or something. It's just a little bit. It isn't. It's not easy on the eye sometimes, right? You
right.
you have to sometimes turn them at angles and
Mhm.
feel them and yeah. Talk a little bit more
Yeah.
about those kind of blemishes and stuff.
And it's funny when you said feel them, right?
Hmm.
Now, to everyone out there, CGC, and I've talked to Matt Nelson and I've talked to other people, CGC, they don't wear gloves for that simple reason. Because sometimes the grader notes come back fingerprints, right? It's because they don't wear gloves. And he specifically wants them to be able to feel the book, you know, be able to turn the pages, because some people can't turn pages when they're wearing gloves. That's the other problem. But the majority, he wants to feel them, feel the books. And sometimes you need that right lighting. That's why we always use the LED lights, daylight, to be able to find certain blemishes. Now, again, a color rubs is part of the, I don't want to say it's the printing, but it's also the delivering process. Diamond or whoever, Penguin,
However, it got chipped.
or
Yep.
right, how it got shipped. They put it in a box and it's jiggling in there. By the time it gets to the store, these guys just grab them and put them on the shelves without thinking, "Oh man, it's been rubbing in there and now it's missing ink." You know, but I mean, it's really important to be able to say, "Hey, let me look at the back. Let me look at the front." And depending on how old the book is, you better count the pages and look for coupons missing. And
Hmm.
that's the other big part, where Hulk 181 is the most popular book out there. And let me tell you, they're not rare by no means. Then they printed a lot of that book, even though it was the Hulk. Um, Majority are missing the Marvel stamp, because in those days there was like some sort of prize where if you collected all the stamps, and there was an actual book made. I know I
Yep.
saw one at a
Hmm.
convention, and you glue them on there, and whoever had them could turn it in. And I forgot what price they got in those days. But I've
Wow.
actually came across one of those books full with all the Marvel stamps in it,
That's
and I'd
super
be like,
cool
man, I
though.
wish I can meet the guy who did this and I could strangle him, because he
How many
he messed
comics
up
did
a
he
lot of.
ruin? How many
Yeah, yeah,
comics did he
exactly.
ruin? Yeah.
Right.
Same
And
thing with Star Wars. We had a special Star Wars Day thing here, and it was about they clipped the little mail-in things, right? So a bunch of figures.
oh, the
Not that we kept
UPC?
figures on cards, but they would you had sailing UPCs or these little coupon
Yeah,
things and things like that to get the obviously Boba Fett, but the Emperor came along later and things like that. So yeah,
yeah.
a ton of stuff gets like that, guys, for sure, for sure. I find
Now,
folks who also don't know, like they'll go online, they'll just see a price, and then you look at a book and you're like, well, that's like a third printing or a fourth printing, or you don't know until you open it up, things like that. Uh,
right.
that would be one I would think also probably comes up pretty common, right? That someone doesn't realize that they own. They
Well,
don't own the first version. They own a subsequent version.
right. And this is where that useless knowledge comes, right?
Yeah.
So certain books with that many printings, at least like DC did and other independent companies, they changed the color somewhere. I'm going to use the best example, Bone number 1. Okay? Bone is a great comic character and they're rare. If you see a Bone one with the letters in red, that's a first print. And then the second one I think was blue and so forth. But they at
Yep.
least changed the color of his title. And I think it
Yep.
goes up to seventh printing, you know. And I had a guy come to me with one. He's like, "Oh my God, this book is I know it's worth $10,000." I go, "Unfortunately, you got the yellow one. That's probably seventh printing." No, it's not.
Yep.
And now the market has changed a lot when it comes to now printings, right? And I know you've
Yep.
probably seen this, where a second printing is worth more than the first or the third. And I it would it's okay if they change the cover, right? But they use the same cover and they just change the book colors. Like for example, Darth Vader number 3, first Doctor Aphra. You know, they had the regular, then the second printing is like a reddish
Yep.
maroon, third printing is green, and fourth printing is purple. Now the purple one is super rare because of the print run. I think the print one is a quarter of what the first one is.
Yep.
And in 9.8, the book is still fetching good money, you know. But back in the day, I'll be
That was
honest,
not the
fourth printing, we're
case.
like, that's
We didn't even
garbage.
buy fourth print. Like we didn't even. I remember getting. It was like Crisis on Infinite Earths, and I remember having it,
Yeah,
and I remember opening it up, and it was like a second print. I'm like, oh my gosh, how did I end up with this nonsense? Right now, it's in
right.
hindsight.
And
I'm like, that was probably worth more than the other one. The best example I give people, because this actually happened early in my channel. I was on with somebody else, and they pulled out. They got a Killing Joke, and they opened it up,
oh,
and it was green. I'm like, oh, hold
yeah,
on, time out. How about you don't read that one? Put that one back in the bag. I got a feeling you spent X amount for that. And they're like, yeah. Says, that's probably a first print. We'll talk about that. But you can
yeah,
get
yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
the real reasonably priced one that you can read and mar up or whatever. But those, I think it's the seventh or the ninth print one, are so rare. And again, they changed the colors, they changed Joker's sleeve, and
Right.
it's created sort of like I don't want to say a secondary market on that, but kind of like a new group of fans that evidently are really
Right.
into some of those kinds of things. And there are some that
Yeah.
are extremely rare for sure.
Oh yeah, it's what they call a niche, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
if I'm correct, the Killing Joke I think goes up to 15 printings.
Oh, it's like
It,
I was going to say 17, but yeah, I would not be shocked if it's yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
And there's not that many books out there that actually went that far.
Hmm.
But kudos to the company. DC made a freaking fortune. I
Hmm.
mean, they made money on that book hand over foot. And you got to give it to them. The popularity of the story. Great story, you know.
Sure.
You can't deny. And they even made it into a cartoon movie, which I wasn't crazy about what they changed in there. And
I
you
don't like
probably,
it. I don't like the cartoon. I walked out to get my soda refilled at one point. I debated whether I was going back in or not because I was sent there on a press
oh,
screening. So
oh,
we'll have a
okay.
little bit more fun now because when I met you, you and your lovely wife, you held back certain books. You were kind of a collector of certain books, and some of those books I think are even more popular now than when I first met you. And they've announced a Last Ronin movie. So are you still on the Ninja Turtle collecting yourselves?
Well, it's more my wife than anything else.
Fair enough.
She's a big turtle nut. We've actually spent 2 days with Kevin Eastman in South Carolina at Comic Con last year. I picked his brain like you can't imagine to the point he got tired of me asking questions. And he was like, "You see that guy over there? He knows more than I do." And I'm like, "How's that possible? You're like the father." next to Peter
Mm.
Laird. You're like the parents, right? How
Yeah.
can that guy over there? And he goes, well, that guy, he's a Ninja Turtle historian. He
Mm.
knows more than I do. And if you ask him, he knows it. It'll blow your mind. And I said, okay, I'll stop bothering you. Because it came to a point where he's like, man, you keep asking all these questions. I go, I got to ask. I mean, this is not every day I can ask you and we were working with him side by side in the same booth with his wife, his whole team. And I mean, when's another opportunity like that's going to come around, right? Where
Yeah.
you can be side by side with the man who helped create the Turtles, which has been, I think, one of the biggest franchise from the comic world. If you think about it, they've had multiple movies, cartoons. I think Nickelodeon still owns the rights to it all. And to this day, a child could be born 5, 6 years ago and be like, "Oh, there's turtles again, still on TV." I mean, think
Yeah.
about that, you
And they're
know.
still
And
making
and
great
my
stuff. I mean, God, it's so good. I mean, Last Ronin is a classic to me. I thought it was fantastic. I
oh,
think the brand new book. I haven't done a video on this. I need to do a video on this new Ninja Turtle Usagi
Lost Years.
Yojimbo book. No, this brand
Oh
new
yeah,
little cartoon one is so good for kids. This was such a fun little book to get people into turtles, and I thought it was great. And
Usagi.
I thought it was fun. It was such a
And
fun little book.
and,
Yeah,
and I love Usagi.
yeah, yeah.
He's
So
another.
I thought
He's
I'd
another.
ask if you guys were still into that stuff. That's cool.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm gonna be honest. I just helped my wife finish collect her original 10 back action figures. She wanted all the originals, all brand new
Yep.
in their cases, unpunched. To top it off, she was like, "I want them unpunched," and I was like, "Oh boy, now you made it more difficult, right?"
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
finally completed the 10 like last week, and she's got her whole. She actually owns the complete run of the first run of Turtles. She's got that whole run done. She's got volume 2 done, and the last Ronin has been an incredible storyline. I think, and I know Eastman, he's blown away because when they pitched it to him and everything, he was like, "Hey, let's go for it," and he didn't expect the way it blew up. It's like a whole new universe just opened up, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he's like, he goes, "You know what? I will continue doing Turtles till my dying days." Because as you know, he sold the rights to the Turtles when Laird took it and then sold it to Nickelodeon. you know. So and then Nickelodeon came to Eastman and was like, "Hey, we need a consultant. Why not one of the fathers of the Turtles?" Because right now Laird, on a level where he is right now, his health is not the best. You know, he is tired, and I'm gonna be honest. I mean, he's up there, and
Yeah.
and I pray for him. And the last show he was at, he was actually in a wheelchair. So
Mm.
just to leave it at that, the conditions he's in. Where Eastman, he looks like a 30-year-old guy rocker. He's
Yeah.
still got
Yeah.
his spiky hair,
He's still
and
going around and rock and rolling shows, man. He's freaking
he
great. Yeah.
he's got this energy that blows my mind. Like when we were at that show, the show finished at 7. The line was still almost out the door, and he told me and told the owner of the show, "I am not leaving until the last person is done. So don't ask me, don't tell me. I will work with everybody until the bitter end." And he would. He did. He loves his fans, and I give him a lot of respect, and I appreciate him on this level because I finally get to know him. I met his wife. We talked. We spent 2 days with him, and I was like, you know what? I don't know anybody else in the industry that's like him. You know,
Hmm.
and mind
Wow,
you,
that's huge.
even though even though Marvel and DC is like the big two, right now, IDW, who has the Turtle brand right now in comics, you know what? As long as Eastman's on board, I'm on board. I mean, he is incredible. He has this energy. He comes up with these great ideas. His artwork is still great. And you know what? I got to give it to him. I don't know anybody else at his level where he's like, yeah, I didn't work for Marvel and work for DC, but you know what? I came up with my own, and I'm still doing my own. I mean, how many people could say that if you think
That's
about it?
awesome. That's it. Yeah, that's true. That's so true. Like, so I'm going to put all the links in the description, and I will be working with Lenny to make sure I have all of his contact information that he wants out there for you guys to reach out to him, send him an email, whatever, with different questions that you have, send in submissions, those kinds of things, or advice on maybe a clean and pressing person that might be closer to where you live, because maybe it would be too expensive for you to ship them to Florida first or whatever. I don't know, whatever works for you
Mhm.
folks. But I just like getting that information out there, a little bit more about what cleaning and pressing is, how it works, and then condition of comics and things like that. Because I have to admit, I know I mean to do this for a long time because I had a hard time finding folks that were helpful to me, and I wasn't a noob. I just didn't, know about some of the new idiosyncrasies. And I now run into people like constantly, like Lenny. I'm not shocked that you're sort of a quasi rock star at a show because people need that kind of advice and knowledge to navigate the things that they love, the passion they love, the hobby that they love, for sure. So
Right.
hopefully
And
we can
and
have
I
you.
and I do this 24/7. I don't have no other job. I just
It's
live
the
and breathe
best.
comic books. And people ask me like, "Really?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's all I do." This business was eye awakening for us. It was mind blowing. We took a chance during COVID, and July 30 would be our fourth year, 4 year running. And I want to thank everybody out there for using or even contacting me for our services, because without them, there's no Spineworks, you know. And I just, before I jumped on air with you, I was outside with FedEx because he had a huge package from a customer that only used us one time from Canada, Ontario, and now send us a huge box full of books. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, now I understand why the guy's been waiting, because he's like, hey, I got this huge box for you. I gotta have a signature. I gotta have some information before I let it go, because again, there's customs paperwork that has to be released and all. And
Sure.
and I and I and it's just mind blowing, and it's a blessing, and I tell everybody, without you guys, there's no Spineworks. There's no me, you know. So I have to say thank you to everybody for giving us the opportunity, even just trying to do business with us. And even if you change your mind and go somebody else, at least I try to help you in some which way or form, and that's why I'm here for. I'm a service provider.
I didn't prep Lenny for this, folks, but you guys at home know I do this now. So I let everybody at the end of a show, I let you ask me a question in case you would have one, even if it could just be some silly question. Doesn't matter. Whatever you feel like you have a question that you're able to ask me.
Oh, okay. Um, what is? I know you mentioned Batman a lot. I guess
Yeah,
that
yeah.
is
Oh yeah.
your
Oh, it was.
your
Yeah.
favorite. So let me ask you this, and this we
Mhm.
had this long conversation with somebody else before Neil Adams came on board to do Batman. Did you like Batman pre Neil Adams? And I'm gonna say the comic books where Batman came in different colors,
Yeah.
fighting alien creatures. I mean,
Yeah.
when they use the word funnies, that's funnies.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
Neil Adams came on board and he brought some realism to
Mhm.
Batman. So do
Sure.
you believe that Neil Adams made a change to where
100
Batman is
percent.
today?
Yeah, 100%. I got into comics much later than this was happening in real time, so this would have been before my time. This was happening.
Okay,
I'm a Miller child, right? 'Cause I got from
okay,
Batman '89 into the Miller stuff. Year one, I was off and running, and then later
right,
I found I kind of worked my way going forward and backwards, and it was
right.
pretty common that you would find an inexpensive reader copy of something in the Batman, in the hundreds or something. I'd read it and be like, what
Right.
on earth? It was
Hmm.
so radically different than what I was used to.
Yeah.
And then I stumbled across an interview, and I forgot what magazine, because you know how those were published all the time, these different price guides and magazines or whatever, and
Right. Right.
Miller
Right.
talked about Miller basically badgered Adams into the business. He would show up every day. It was just constantly trying to show him out. And Adams was like, dude, your art is weird. Like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
know. And I guess one day when Miller showed up, Adams had other creatives there, and I forget their names. And they were like, no, dude, the story is really good. You should give this guy a shot or whatever. And I guess that's when Adams made the phone call. And that's how Miller kind of got in. Miller gives Adams a lot of credit. And I don't know if there's other pieces to that, but 100% agree that we wouldn't even be where we are without Neil Adams, because it just reshaped
Right.
everything. And as I've gone back and read a lot of those issues and filled in, I'm like, oh yeah, I don't own a lot of that anymore. Um, but I have such massive respect, and I do look at them from time to time. Like, should I rebuy this? But I also am like, I'm not gonna physically read it again. I know that it would just be
Right.
like a wall book kind of thing for me.
Right.
So I'll read them.
Right. Right.
I'll read them digitally and things like that. But yeah, Neil Adams doesn't get the credit that he. R.I.P. Neil Adams, right? We just lost him over the last couple of years, so it's
Yep. Hmm.
it's an eye opener for sure. But yeah, no, great name drop on that for sure. That his
Yeah.
stuff changed the game for me. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't imagine if I didn't get the Batman I wanted. Like, what would, if it hadn't been for Adams, it would have got me to Miller, which got, you know what I mean? It's like, oh yeah, the dominoes
Exactly.
wouldn't have lined up. Yeah, the stars didn't align. So yeah,
Because
great.
because for me, collecting comic books as long as I have, I didn't give Batman no respect when I used to see it on the shelves, because I was like, why is he wearing a yellow costume? Why is he wearing a pink
Mhm.
costume? And then you keep seeing some of the issues and like corny little creatures and aliens, and I'm like, there's something wrong with this, and I'm like, this is not the Batman I'm growing up with, because you watch Adam West, right?
Mhm.
He was an okay Batman. He was a great Bruce Wayne. You know what I mean? And then you have Michael Keaton, who came on board to do Batman, and he did a phenomenal job. I mean, to me, he is both Batman and Bruce Wayne, right? But in the comic book world, um, I think when Neil Adams came on board, he gave that grittiness, that seriousness that the comic book needed, because that word funnies again, right?
Mhm.
It was that before him, and I had
Sure.
no respect for Batman before Neil. And then when he came in, he really changed it up. I mean, they got more serious writers. I mean, you even had Alan Moore come in,
Mhm.
and you know how he writes. I mean,
Sure.
if anything, he is. I mean, he's got a dark mind. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
Frank
Yeah.
Miller killed it with Year One. He killed it with Dark Knight Returns, because I had an interview with him years ago, actually when the book first came out, Dark
Mm.
Knight Returns. And even he was shocked that would he said to me, I didn't expect what people will respect my version of Batman, because mind you, it's in the future when he wrote it in
Mhm.
the 80s, right? He says Batman's now old, he's decrepit, he's like broken down, and now they're calling him back in one more time. And now, can he or can he not continue at the age he was? You know what I mean? And back then, I mean, the shows that Frank used to do, they were free. And I'm not talking about hotel cons back in New York,
Yeah. Yeah.
where
Yeah.
where Frank would sit down and people would sign the book and they'll talk to him and he would just chat with you. And he was like, I didn't think it was going to get this big. I mean, he got multiple prizes for
Mhm.
Dark Knight Returns. And mind you, he really, really changed it up to the point where it's like, oh wow, Batman kills in that storyline.
Yeah.
Where in the other books he's never killed before. You know what
Right.
I mean?
Yeah. No, I
And
agree.
and and
I
it's
think it's great to. It's just always phenomenal to uh, reminisce about that too, right? The Adams to Miller, and then what happens
right.
going forward, and just how it explodes too, because obviously it's like the perfect storm of everything aligned. The planets all aligning just right to get Burton
Hmm.
inspired to adapt 89 a certain way with a certain type of tone. There's no Robin in it, so this is how we.
Right.
And then of course, and then what that does for the comics and things like that. So, well, brother, my friend, thank you so much for so much of your time. Appreciate that. We'll try to have you back again too, as well. I need to. Plan my finances to resubmit these books to you and then to CGC and see what happens. Because I have about a
Okay.
handful or so that I didn't have clean and press, and they got sent in. They came back with issues. And I wanted to see, but we have to talk about that offline to figure that out. But folks,
Sure.
again,
Sure.
Spineworks is a great resource. I'll have his email, different website, all the information that you need to contact him and get more information. But I can't thank you enough for that, brother. Also, just appreciate your friendship, man. Learning about so much stuff from you. I know we haven't talked in a while, but it's been great to know how much you helped me in my collection back in the day as well.
No,
So
thank you.
appreciate that, my friend. All right,
No, you're
folks.
very
Listen,
welcome.
folks, you guys take care. Until next time, I am Pops.